Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. Footsteps on the moss path. The forest near the outskirts of Arashiyama was quiet, wrapped in a soft morning mist that filtered through tall cedars and age-old maples. Between the trunks, a narrow path wove like a forgotten melody. It was lined with thick moss, soft as velvet beneath one's feet, and known to the villagers as the Path of Whispers. Few dared to tread it alone, not because of danger, but because the silence along the path was so complete it stirred forgotten memories. Legend said that those who walked the moss path with an open heart would hear the voices of the forest, not loud, but gentle, like the sound of wind brushing through ancient leaves. Yuna, a young botanist from Tokyo, had arrived in the area seeking rare moss varieties for a study. She was meticulous, modern, and skeptical of folklore. Yet, as she entered the path that morning, something about its tranquility unsettled her. Each step was soundless. Her boots, chosen for mountain hiking, seemed to float on the moss. The silence wrapped around her like silk. No birds sang, no twigs snapped. Only her breath and the faint thrum of her heart marked the passage of time. She paused at a bend where an old stone lantern, mottled with lichen, stood crooked beside the path. Something compelled her to kneel and brush the moss near its base. She touched it lightly, marveling at its softness and the way dew clung like tiny stars. A whisper. She looked up, startled. No one was there. Shaking her head, she resumed her walk. She told herself it was just the wind. But the air was still. Heavy. Expectant. Further along, she found a series of stepping stones. Each was inscribed with a single kanji, worn with age. She traced one with her finger. Kokura, heart. Another whisper. This time closer. Yuna stood and turned. The mist had thickened. Trees she had passed now looked unfamiliar. The path ahead blurred into white. "Come," the voice said, gentle as rain on a temple roof. Despite her fear, Yuna stepped forward. The mist parted slightly, revealing a clearing she had not seen on any map. In its center stood a tea house, humble and aged, with a roof of thatch and walls weathered by time. Inside, an old woman waited. Her kimono was pale green, patterned with moss and ferns. Her eyes were kind but held the weight of centuries. "You have come far," the woman said, gesturing to the cushion before her. Yuna sat without question. The woman poured tea, fragrant with something Yuna could not name. "You listen well," the woman said. "Most cannot hear the forest anymore." Yuna frowned. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just studying." Moss remembers, the woman said, smiling. It grows where time is slow. It listens. And sometimes it speaks. They drank in silence. The warmth of the tea spread through Yuna like morning sunlight. Her heart calmed. The path no longer felt strange, but familiar. When she looked up, the tea house was gone. She stood alone in the clearing. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing the moss path ahead. Yuna followed it back. The forest was still silent, but no longer lonely. Each step was a conversation, each breath a note in an unseen melody. When she returned to the village, the locals watched her with quiet respect. One old man nodded. "You walked the path," he said. Yuna nodded. That evening, in her journal, she wrote not of species or samples, but of listening. Of silence. Of footsteps that leave no trace, yet echo forever in the heart of the forest. The spirit sleeps in the pines. The mountain village of Takahara sat quietly nestled between the vast, ancient pines of the Kii Peninsula. The only sounds that filled the air were the whispers of the wind, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional call of a distant bird. Life in Takahara moved at its own unhurried pace, untouched by the bustle of modern cities. Yet, despite its serenity, there was an undercurrent of mystery in the village. A legend passed down through generations that spoke of spirits that slumbered in the towering pines. Kenji had heard the stories since he was a child. His grandmother used to tell him about the forest spirit show they protected the land and the people, but how they could also be dangerous if disturbed. "The spirit sleeps in the pines, Kenji," she would say with a knowing look, her voice soft and reverent. "It is the spirit of our ancestors, who watch over us." For years, Kenji had thought the stories were nothing more than old folklore, fairy tales meant to keep children in line. But when his grandmother passed away just a few months ago, something inside him began to stir. He found himself drawn to the forest, to the pines, in a way that he had never felt before. He was born in the village, raised by his grandmother after his parents died when he was young. The quiet, remote nature of the village always felt like a comfort to him, though as he grew older, he found himself questioning his place there. He had spent years away from Takahara, studying in the city, working in the fast-paced world of finance. But after his grandmother's death, he returned home aimless, unsure of what he was seeking. One late autumn evening, Kenji walked to the edge of the village, where the pines stood like sentinels. The sun had long since dipped behind the mountains, and the moon cast a pale glow over the forest. The air was cool and crisp, the scent of pine needles strong and earthy. He stood there for a long time, listening to the wind, feeling the pull of the ancient trees. "Grandmother," he whispered into the wind, "what am I supposed to do now?" The answer came not in words but in a feeling, deep within his chest. It was as though the very earth beneath him had shifted, as if the forest itself had responded to his plea. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his feet carrying him deeper into the woods. The further he went, the more the forest seemed to close in around him. The trees grew denser, their trunks thick and dark, the air colder and more still. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy, and Kenji could hardly see where he was stepping. Yet, he felt an undeniable pull, an urge to go deeper. It wasn't long before he came upon a clearing, where the trees opened up to reveal an ancient shrine. Its stone steps were weathered and worn, and the torii gate that once stood tall was now leaning at an angle, covered in moss. The shrine was abandoned, forgotten by time, but there was something sacred about it, something that made Kenji's heart beat faster. He approached cautiously, his breath coming in shallow gasps. As he climbed the steps, the wind picked up, swirling around him. At the top of the steps stood a stone statue of Jizo, the protector of travelers and children. The statue was weathered by years of exposure to the elements, but its eyes carved with great care seemed to gleam in the moonlight. Kenji knelt before the statue, a feeling of reverence washing over him. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to do so, but it felt like the right thing to do. He bowed his head, closing his eyes. "I don't know why I'm here," he whispered. "But I need to understand." For a moment, everything around him was still. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. And then, as if from the very earth itself, a voice spoke soft, faint, but unmistakable. "The spirit sleeps in the pines." Kenji opened his eyes, but he saw nothing. The voice had been inside him, not from any person or place, but from the very air around him. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a chill run through his body. "The spirit of the pines," the voice continued. "The spirit of your ancestors. It is in the trees, in the wind, in the very soil of this land. They have always watched over this village, protecting it, guiding it. And now, they have chosen you." Kenji could feel the weight of those words settle on his shoulders, like a cloak woven from ancient memories. He had come seeking something, but what was it that he was being called to? What was his connection to the forest, to the spirit of the pines? "You are the heir of this place," the voice said, now stronger, clearer. "It is time for you to remember." Before he could respond, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, and the moonlight suddenly intensified, illuminating the trees around him. The pines seemed to stretch taller, their branches reaching toward the sky, and in that moment, Kenji felt as though he was standing at the very center of the universe. The wind carried with it a sense of timelessness, as if he had stepped into a place that existed outside of time itself. A sudden rush of memories flooded his mind's grandmother's gentle hands. Her quiet voice telling stories of the old ways, of the spirits that watched over the village. He remembered how, as a child, he would play beneath the pines, feeling the presence of something greater than himself. The village, his family, the mountains, they were all connected, woven into the fabric of his being. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized what he had been searching for all along. It wasn't the city, the fast-paced life, or the material success he had sought. It was this place, this connection to the land, to his heritage, to the spirit of his ancestors. "You must protect them now," the voice said, the final words echoing through him like a sacred vow. "The spirit sleeps in the pines, but it is waking now. It is time for you to awaken with it." Kenji felt the ground beneath him pulse with energy, the forest alive with a power he had never known existed. The trees, the wind, the very air seemed to hold their breath as if waiting for him to respond. And in that moment, he understood. The legacy of his ancestors, the spirits of the forest, were not just myths. They were real, and they had been waiting for him to take his place among them. He stood up slowly, his legs trembling but strong. The moonlight bathed the clearing in a soft, ethereal glow, and he could feel the presence of the spirit in the pines, watching over him, guiding him. He wasn't just Kenji anymore. He was part of something greater, something eternal. With a final glance at the statue of Jizo, he turned and made his way back down the steps. The path through the forest was no longer dark and uncertain. It was illuminated by the spirit of the pines, and Kenji knew that he had found his way home. In the space between the winds, the village of Shiranui sat high in the mountains, shrouded in mists that rarely parted before noon. It was a place the modern world had mostly forgotten, where telephone lines swayed like prayer flags, and time moved with the seasons rather than the ticking of a clock. Here, in an abandoned house on the edge of the cedar forest, Aoi had come to disappear. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Not her friends in Tokyo, not her estranged parents, not even her co-workers who had watched her desk gather dust in silent confusion. One morning, after leaving her apartment key on the kitchen counter, she boarded a train heading west, as far as it would take her. No plan, just motion. And motion, as it turned out, was what she needed. Now, in this half-collapsed house that smelled of damp earth and cedar resin, she spent her days in silence listening. Because there was something unusual about the wind here. It did not howl or rush through the trees like it had in the city. It moved gently, deliberately, as if remembering how to breathe. Sometimes it carried the scent of moss and distant rain. Sometimes it seemed to whisper half a sigh, half a voice just beyond the range of understanding. It never said anything outright, and yet she felt it spoke. The villagers, few as they were, rarely came near the forest. The old woman from the next ridge had brought her rice and pickled vegetables once a week, never staying long. She'd told Aoi that the house had once belonged to a monk who had disappeared into the wind, as she put it. Aoi had smiled politely, but the words stayed with her. Into the wind. What did that mean, to vanish between breaths? To become part of something invisible? One evening, after a day of scattered snow and slow curling mist, Aoi walked deeper into the forest than she ever had before. She had no goal in mind, only the faint pull of the wind drawing her forward. The trees grew older here, their trunks thick and furrowed like time-worn faces. The path narrowed to nothing, then opened into a small hollow, a clearing untouched by axe or human step. And in the center of that hollow stood a stone altar. Moss-covered, cracked, but unmistakably placed by human hands. Aoi approached, heart thrumming. There were no offerings on the altar, no signs of worship. But something about the place felt sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the way that old forests feel sacred, simply because they have endured. She sat before it, cross-legged on the moss. And then she waited. For what, she didn't know. The wind came, soft and curling, like fingers through long hair. It danced over the stones, brushing against her cheek. And then she heard it. A voice, neither male nor female, ancient and childlike all at once. Not in words, but in a feeling. You are not lost. You are in between. The wind stilled. Time folded in on itself. Memories rose. She remembered the hospital hallway, white and humming. Her sister's voice over the phone, flat and broken. She didn't wake up. She remembered standing in her apartment, unable to cry, surrounded by congratulatory cards for a job promotion she hadn't even wanted. She remembered the last time her mother had smiled at her, years before the silence fell between them. It all came back, not like a flood, but like soft rain, soaking her slowly. And still, the voice lingered. The wind carries sorrow only if you hold it too tightly. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. And then another. Each exhale felt like a wordless release. Tears come not from pain, but from the relief of being finally, fully heard. That night, Aoi remained in the forest clearing until the stars peeked through the tree canopy. The wind had settled into a steady rhythm, like the breathing of something ancient and kind. She walked back to the house lighter, her steps no longer dragging. In the days that followed, she began to move differently. She repaired the windows of the house, swept the floors, and even planted herbs in cracked pots outside. The wind remained her quiet companion, threading through the rafters, brushing against her neck, never forceful, always present. Villagers began to notice. The old woman smiled more often when she came by. One child, curious and barefoot, followed her to the forest edge and left a pine cone at her doorstep. Aoi began writing again. Not emails or reports, but small thoughts, phrases, poems, like, "Between one breath and the next, the world learns to turn again." Or, "The wind never leaves it, simply passes so we might remember our voices." Seasons shifted. Snow gave way to early buds. Birds returned to the forest canopy, and with them came the rustle of waking things. And one morning, standing on the ridge, Aoi felt it. A silence that wasn't absence, but fullness. She had come here to disappear, but what she'd found was not erasure. It was space. The space between winds. The place where things pause. Where sorrow and healing can coexist without contradiction. As the breeze brushed past her once more, Aoi closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm still here." The wind answered not in words, but in movement. A quiet, circling breath that lifted her hair and carried her voice into the trees. And then it moved on, like it always did, carrying her with it, just enough to begin again. Path beneath the moonlight. The train ride to Tsukikage village took longer than he remembered. Ren watched the scenery unfold through the scratched glass of the carriage. Rice fields dyed gold in the twilight, mountains dissolving into shadows, and the first faint glimmers of evening stars appearing above. It had been 6 years since he last came here, and everything looked the same, yet older, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The reason for his return lay folded in his coat pocket, a letter written in trembling ink, barely legible, sent weeks before she passed. When the moon is full, follow the path to the back of the shrine. I'll be waiting. Grandmother Hannah. Ren had laughed when he first read it. She had always been a strange woman, half poet, half mystic, speaking in riddles even in her final years. But now, with the weight of her funeral behind him, and the house standing quiet and empty, the memory of her words pressed harder against his chest. The moon was full tonight. And so, as the village settled into slumber, Ren stepped out into the cool night air and made his way toward the old shrine that sat nestled against the forest's edge. The path was overgrown, but he remembered the way barefoot summers as a boy, running with a lantern in hand, his grandmother humming old songs beside him. She used to say the forest was alive, that the trees listened if you spoke softly enough, and the wind carried your secrets to the moon. Back then, he believed her. Back then, everything had meaning. He reached the shrine gates just as the moon cleared the mountain ridge. Its silver light bathed the wooden torii, casting long shadows across the moss-covered stones. A stillness settled over the clearing, not silence, but something deeper, like the world holding its breath. Behind the shrine, as the letter instructed, was a path. Narrow, nearly swallowed by tall grass and ferns. He hesitated only a moment before stepping onto it. The moonlight guided him. It filtered through the trees in pale ribbons, lighting the ground just enough to see without stumbling. The path curved and twisted, deeper into the forest. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The air smelled of wet leaves and old cedar. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a figure in a white kimono standing between the trees, facing away from him. Grandma? The woman didn't turn. Instead, she began walking, her bare feet soundless on the path. Ren hesitated, heart caught between logic and longing, then followed. She led him through a part of the forest. He had never seen. Tall stone lanterns, long crumbled and hidden by ivy, lined the sides of the path like ancient sentinels. The moonlight made them glow faintly, as if remembering their purpose. After some time, the path opened into a clearing. In its center stood a pond, round and perfectly still, reflecting the moon with unsettling clarity. The woman was already there, kneeling beside the water. When Ren stepped into the clearing, she turned. It was her, younger than he remembered. Her hair was longer, darker. Her face was unlined by age, yet unmistakable. The same wise eyes, the same gentle curve to her smile. "Ren," she said, as if no time had passed. "You kept your promise." He couldn't speak. His throat tightened, eyes stinging. She reached out, brushing his sleeve. "This place only opens under the full moon. Few remember how to find it. But you always listened. Is this real?" He managed to whisper. "Does it matter?" She replied. "You're here. I'm here." They sat beside the pond, side by side like old times. She spoke of things she remembered: his first scraped knee, the plum tree they planted, the day he left without saying goodbye. He spoke of the city, of exhaustion, of feeling lost in a world that moved too fast to understand. Of how he'd stopped dreaming. Of how even her letter had felt like a dream until tonight. "Dreams," she murmured, "are just truths that the waking mind forgets." The wind stirred the water. A few petals, where had they come from, floated across the surface. "Do you remember," she asked, "the story I used to tell? About the moon path?" Ren nodded. "The one where the moonlight is a bridge for souls." "Yes," she smiled. "Some say it's for the dead. But I believe it's for the living who've forgotten how to feel." They fell into silence again. The pond shimmered like silver silk. A fox barked in the distance. The trees leaned closer, listening. Finally, she stood. "It's time," she said. "No, wait," he stood too, sudden panic rising. "Will I see you again?" She looked up at the moon. "Only when you remember to walk slowly. To listen. To breathe between thoughts. Then, maybe." The wind carried her voice away as the moon dipped lower, and before he could take another step toward her, she was gone. Not vanished, dissolved, like mist in morning light. Ren stood in the clearing, alone with the pond, the trees, and the moon above. He didn't cry. He didn't move for a long time. Then, quietly, he bowed to the space where she had been. And he walked back along the moonlit path. The forest did not feel lonely. It felt awake, alive. And as he stepped beyond the shrine gate and into the coming dawn, he carried with him the memory of her voice, and the whisper of moonlight between leaves. Words floating on water. The lake had always listened. Long before the first villagers built shrines to forgotten gods or set paper lanterns afloat on midsummer nights. Lake Mikazuki lay still and listening, a vast mirror beneath the mountains, cradling silence like a secret. And somewhere along its northern edge, in a cottage of cedar and wind chimes, lived a girl who wrote words that never stayed on the page. Aya was the daughter of a calligrapher, though her father had passed when she was young. Her mother, a quiet woman who wove nets for the fishermen, rarely spoke of the past. But Aya inherited her father's love for ink, thick, black, and alive, and from a young age, she filled sheet after sheet with delicate brushstrokes. Not knowing what she was writing until the page was full. She never showed anyone. Instead, she folded each page into a small boat and set it upon the lake. Always at dusk. Always in silence. And the lake accepted them. Each boat drifted slowly outward, turning gently with the wind, until the ink blurred into the water and the paper, waterlogged, sank beneath the surface. Aya never tried to find them again. She didn't need to. The lake knew. But one summer, everything changed. It began with a sound. A hollow knock, just after sunset, as Aya stood ankle-deep in the water, ready to release another of her word boats. She looked up. Across the lake, something floated. A boat. A real one. In it sat a boy, not much older than her, with dark hair and a sketchbook resting on his knees. He looked just as surprised to see her. "You're the girl who sends messages to the lake," he called across the water. Aya froze. He rowed closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spy. I've been drawing this lake every summer since I was a kid. I saw one of your paper boats last week." Aya said nothing. The boy held up a slightly crumpled, half-dry sheet of paper. Her handwriting bloomed across the page like a lost song. "You write poems," he said. "They're beautiful." "No," she replied softly. "They're not meant to be read." But they were. By me. Accidentally. He wasn't smug about it. Just curious. Quiet. Like the lake. Aya turned back to the water. "They're not for people. They're for forgetting." The boy didn't answer right away. Instead, he tore a page from his sketchbook and began to draw. His pencil moved quickly, gently. After a while, he held the page out. It was her, standing in the water, holding a paper boat. Aya stared at it. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and took the page. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. That night, she didn't send her poem into the water. The boy's name was Naoki. He came to the lake every evening after that. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. He brought sketchbooks. She brought words. At first, they traded in silence. A drawing for a poem. A question for a memory. A glance for a smile. They sat on the dock beneath the weeping willow, legs dangling above the water, speaking in the language that lives between those who do not need to explain. One night, under a full moon, Naoki asked, "Why do you send them away?" Aya hesitated. Then, "Because I'm afraid to keep them." "Even the beautiful ones? Especially those." She looked away, watching the ripple of moonlight on the lake. "Words are dangerous. If I keep them too close, they might turn into something I can't control. Grief. Hope. Or worse, memories." Naoki was quiet. Then he said, "Maybe the lake isn't taking them away. Maybe it's keeping them safe." Aya didn't answer. But that night, she kept her paper boat folded in her lap. Summer deepened. Cicadas screamed. The wind smelled of warm pine and distant rain. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled in. A storm gathered on the far side of the mountains. Aya waited by the lake, but Naoki didn't come. He didn't come the next day either. Or the next. On the fourth day, a man knocked on her door. Naoki's uncle. The boat had overturned. They found the sketchbook. Not him. The lake had taken him. Aya didn't cry. She walked to the shore, alone, and knelt by the water. The storm had passed, but the wind lingered, stirring the surface like restless fingers. She unfolded one of her poems, an old one, and read it aloud for the first time. Then she placed it in the water. It did not drift. It was as if the lake had stopped listening. Weeks passed. The lake was quiet. Aya no longer wrote. But on the first night of Oben, the festival of lanterns, she walked to the water's edge with a single, unmarked paper boat. No ink. No message. Just silence. She knelt, closed her eyes, and whispered, "One more." She placed the blank boat on the water. It drifted, slowly, quietly, toward the heart of the lake. Then something strange. The boat stopped, and turned. Against the wind, against the current, it turned back. And floating beside it another boat. Faded, weathered, but still intact. Aya waded into the water, hands trembling. She reached for the second boat and unfolded it. Her poem, but not in her handwriting. It was drawn. Her words had been illustrated, each line transformed into an image, the curve of a moon, the shape of a tear, the trace of a name never spoken. A voice echoed behind her. I read them all. She turned. Naoki stood on the dock, hair damp with mist, eyes filled with something ancient and endless. But how? He smiled. The lake kept them safe. For both of us. She walked toward him, unsure if she was dreaming, but no longer afraid to find out. He held out his sketchbook. Blank pages. Waiting. She took his hand. And together, they sat on the dock again. Two voices. Two vessels. Filling the night with words that no longer needed to float away. Between dew and light, at the foot of a quiet mountain stood a humble tea hut known as Goen, the Hermitage of Dawn. In spring, it was fragrant with cherry blossoms. In summer, the voices of cicadas echoed across the garden. In autumn, crimson leaves danced like fire. And in winter, silence lay across every surface like a blanket of snow. The hut had stood for over 100 years, not seeking to defy time, but gently accepting the passing of the seasons, simply existing serenely. The one who cared for this place was a young woman named Mio. Once, she had lived in the city studying, working, rushing. But after the death of her grandmother, Mio had returned to inherit the hut, as quietly as the way light falls across a tatami mat. Her grandmother had been a woman of few words, yet when she prepared tea, it was as though she conversed with the wind itself. It was beautiful, sacred. That memory clung to Mio more than any photograph. Mio's tea practice was still young. Every morning, she read from her grandmother's old notebook, worn and soft like mulberry paper soaked in time. Still, doubt often visited her. She was not sure if what she offered in each cup was truly tea or merely hot water in a borrowed ritual. One evening, under the pale blade of a crescent moon, an old man came to the hermitage. He wore white hakama and leaned on a weathered bamboo cane. His face was creased like a dry riverbed, but his eyes sparkled with clarity, as if reflecting a still pond under starlight. "May I have a bowl of tea?" he asked, his voice as gentle as a wind chime in early summer. Mio hesitated but bowed deeply and began to prepare the tea. Her hands trembled slightly, but she felt as though through the air itself that her grandmother was watching, guiding her silently. The old man sipped the tea without a word. A long pause followed, not awkward but vast. Then, at last, he spoke. "This tea tastes like something between dew and light." "Between dew and light?" "Yes. That fleeting moment when the morning sun first kisses the dew on the leaves. So brief yet the most beautiful." Mio's breath caught. Those were the same words her grandmother used to say. Life, her grandmother would whisper, is like that moment, tea even more so. We must prepare it with hands that remember the dew, and hearts that long for light. The old man smiled faintly. "Your tea carries hesitation, stillness, and just a trace of prayer. That is what makes it good. It is not perfection that moves the heart, but sincerity." From then on, the old man came every week. He would drink a single bowl of tea, identify the names of tiny flowers blooming in the garden, listen to the wind, and then leave, without asking anything in return. One day, Mio found the courage to ask him, "Why do you come to drink my tea?" The old man looked away, almost wistful. "Long ago, there was someone whose tea I loved. It was quiet yet it lingered, deep in the soul. Your tea carries the faintest shadow of theirs. Was it someone dear to you?" He nodded gently. "They are no longer in this world. But the memory of their tea lives on. In my body. In my breath. And now, in your hands." That night, Mio cried for the first time while preparing tea. She didn't need to speak of her grandmother. Somehow, the old man already understood. And that understanding, unspoken but present, overwhelmed her with gratitude. As autumn deepened and maple leaves painted the path with fire, the old man suddenly stopped coming. 1 week passed. Then 2. Then a month. One crisp morning, Mio found a single folded piece of paper lying on the floor where he always sat. It was a short message, written in brush and ink. Your tea indeed carried the presence of that person. Even when this body returns to earth, the memory of that tea will remain in the wind, urging you onward. The way of tea is to walk between dew and light. Do not fear. Mio gently placed the paper between the pages of her grandmother's notebook. The next morning, with mist hanging low in the garden, she prepared tea alone. There was no guest. And yet, the leaves rustled softly. The sunlight caught on the dew. The steam from the bowl rose gently. And the flavor of the tea, quiet, warm, fleeting, lived in her hands, and her heart. Echoes of the pines. Halfway up a quiet mountain stood a small temple. It was called Serene, the Temple of Clear Pines. The cypress bark roof had been worn thin by years of wind and rain, and the moss-covered stone steps deepened in color with each passing storm. Behind the main hall grew more than 100 ancient pines. When the wind passed through, their low rustling known as shori wrapped the mountainside in a sound both vast and intimate. Only one young monk tended the temple now Shoshin. Since the passing of his master, the head priest, few visitors had come. The temple lived mostly in the company of seasonal sounds, the cicadas of summer, the snow's hush in winter. But to Soshin, this was no loneliness. In the whisper of the pines, he often felt his master's voice still lingering. A visitor in early autumn. One day in mid-September, a cool breeze swept the mountain. A woman appeared at the gate. She wore a pale brown kimono and straw sandals that spoke of long walks on mountain paths. She looked to be in her early 30s. Bowing deeply, she spoke softly. "I was told my late father's memorial tablet is kept here." Soshin nodded, recalling an old record. Indeed, 5 years ago, the temple had taken in the tablet of a man who, according to his master, had been a dear friend and tea companion. The woman's name was Seo. After paying her respects at the altar, she turned toward the pine grove and stood quietly for a long moment. "This sound feels familiar." Soshin smiled faintly. "The shori is a curious thing. Listen long enough, and it can sound like human voices or the ocean's waves." Seo nodded, her gaze distant. "When I was little, I often climbed mountains with my father. Before dawn, the pines would sound like the sea, and he would tell me old stories. Memories in the pines." From that day, Seo began visiting the temple every few days. Soshin would prepare a simple bowl of tea, and they would sit together on the veranda overlooking the grove. One afternoon, she told him, "My father used to say the sound of pines carries the voices of the dead. He said these pines at Serai-ji have held 100 years of voices." The words sent a quiet shiver through Soshin. "My master said much the same," he replied. "That the pines bear both joy and sorrow, and carry them on the wind." Seo smiled faintly. "Then perhaps my father's voice is there too." A night of mist. In October, a deep fog embraced the mountain. As Soshin was extinguishing the lamps for the night, a faint note of music reached his ears. It was a flute, delicate, uncertain, woven into the sigh of the pines. He stepped outside, following the sound through the mist. Between the trunks, a pale shape appeared. It was Seo. Eyes closed, she was playing an old bamboo flute. "What is that?" Soshin asked. She lowered the instrument, catching her breath. "My father's flute. When you play it here, the pines always answer. I loved listening to that when I was a child." Soshin glanced upward. The mist swirled through the branches. The pine's murmur wrapped itself around the fading note of the flute, until the two were one. Footsteps that vanish. Soon after, Seo stopped coming. A week passed. Then 2. Then more. Each morning, Soshin found himself glancing down the mountain path, but she never appeared. Then one cold morning, at the entrance to the pine grove, he found a small wooden box. Inside lay the bamboo flute and a single folded letter. To Soshin, I am returning the flute to this place. My father's voice is surely part of these pines now. Please, play it from time to time. May its sound reach another heart, as it once reached mine. Seo. Soshin held the box to his chest and returned silently to the main hall. Winter's echo. In the stillness of a snowy night, Soshin sat on the veranda and brought the flute to his lips. The low, tender note drifted into the white world. The pines swayed gently, answering with their voice. In that sound, he felt the presence of his master, of Seo's father, and of Seo herself. Closing his eyes, he listened. The echoes of the pines would travel on, carried by the wind, perhaps for another 100 years, bearing the memory of all who had once heard them. The mountain speaks, the wind listens. The mountain had a name. But almost no one remembered it. The villagers simply called it Oyamathe Great Mountain, and through the seasons they paid it silent respect. Gazing up at the wild cherry blossoms in spring, at the fiery leaves in autumn, and at the crown of snow in winter. Halfway up its slope stood a small hermitage. It was home to an old man with hair the color of frost genso. Once, long ago, he had been a woodcutter living on the village's edge. But one year, he began to hear the voice of the mountain itself. From that time on, he left the lowlands behind and built his dwelling here, among the pines and stones. The voice of the mountain. The mountain's voice was not human speech. It was the whisper of water passing through cracks in the rock, the rustle of fallen leaves stirred by unseen breezes. The flap of wings, the distant call of a deer. Layer upon layer, these sounds formed a single, living harmony. Genso called this harmony Yamagatarid Mountains telling. One late summer day, a young woman climbed the path to his hermitage. Her name was Kaide, and she was 17 years old. She had come, she said, at her ailing mother's request. My mother told me she once lost her way in these mountains. She said a strange voice guided her back. Could it have been? Genso nodded slowly. It was likely the Yamagatari. The mountain sees those who enter. Sometimes it will aid them and sometimes it will test them. The border between mountain and man. From then on, Kaide visited often. Walking the mountain trails, she practiced the listening Genso taught her. You do not listen with your ears alone, he would say. You feel the ground's pulse through your soles, read the wind's warmth on your skin, and open your heart to the shape of all sounds together. One morning, in heavy mist, Kaide stopped suddenly. I hear it, low and long. Genso gave a small nod. That is the sound of the mountain waking. It exhales the cold and the dew gathered through the night, and prepares to meet the day. Just then, a current of wind brushed Kaide's ear like a question quietly asked. The mountain speaks, Genso murmured. The wind listens and carries its words far. Even to the sea. The mountain's trial. When autumn deepened and the first snow fell, Genso spoke again by the glow of the hearth. Soon, the mountain will test you. Days later, Kaide entered the forest alone. The sky turned heavy, snow began to fall hard. The trail vanished beneath white. Then, from within the snow, a faint tone rose low, gentle, like a voice calling her name. Following it, she crossed a stand of pines, forded a frozen stream and found herself before the hermitage. At the doorway stood Genso, smiling. "You have been accepted. What the wind carries." Winter passed. Spring returned. Snowmelt streamed through the valleys, and birds returned to the high branches. Kaide told him, "I want to be someone who protects this mountain. To guide others, as my mother was guided." Genso nodded, his gaze drifting to the far ridges. "One day, I will return to the mountain myself. But the Yamagatari will not vanish. It will remain in your ears and in the wind." As he said, years later, Genso passed away quietly. That day, the mountain murmured deep and long, and a soft wind flowed down into the village. An endless dialogue. Now Kaide tends the hermitage. In spring, summer, autumn, winter the mountain speaks, and the wind listens still. Sometimes the voice guides the lost. Sometimes it soothes the weary. And always, the stories of the mountain and people travel outward on the wind. The mountain speaks, the wind listens, an unending conversation. Even when people leave, the hill and wind will speak forever.